A network built almost entirely around the success of one show ended up losing that exact show to a rival network in a bidding war, and it never fully recovered. 11 years after it launched, this network didn't get canceled in the usual sense. It got folded into a merger and quietly erased. This is the story of the WB, the network that gave us Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dawson's Creek, Gilmore Girls, and Smallville. Coming up, Buffy walks across town to UPN in the middle of its own run. The network's own chairman publicly kills off its mascot, and a 2006 merger shuts the whole operation down almost overnight. A network that launched some of the most beloved shows of the 90s and 2000s deserves a real explanation for why it barely lasted 11 years. And that's exactly what we're digging into. Understanding how the WB disappeared means going back to a moment when a fourth network, let alone a fifth or sixth, sounded like a bad idea to almost everyone except the person who ended up running it. Section 1. A fourth network nobody expected to work. The WB launched in January of 1995, backed by Time Warner and the Tribune Company. UPN launched that same week. Both networks were built on the same bet, that there was room for two more national broadcasters squeezed in alongside ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Jamie Kellner ran the network, and having already helped launch Fox a decade earlier, he knew exactly what a startup network up against three giants actually required. He didn't chase the biggest possible audience the way the older networks did. Instead, Kellner made a deliberate, almost contrarian choice, going after the one demographic the big three were mostly ignoring: teenagers and young women, roughly 12 to 34 years old. Section 2. Finding its voice. The earliest version of the WB was scattered, and it's easy to forget how unglamorous the launch actually was. Urban-focused sitcoms and family comedies filled the first fall lineup, aimed at whoever happened to be home and willing to give a brand new, barely carried network a try. A Kids WB Saturday morning block launched that same September, and it gave the network at least one steady, built-in audience while the primetime side kept searching for its identity. None of it added up to a clear voice yet, and there was no guarantee the network would even still exist a few years later. Everything changed in March of 1997. Buffy the Vampire Slayer premiered and became an instant critical hit, driving a 32% jump in teen viewership almost overnight. And Kellner followed that success with Seventh Heaven. Then, in January of 1998, Dawson's Creek launched and eventually became the highest-rated show in the network's entire history. Within a few years, the lineup had grown to include Charmed, Felicity, and Angel, the Buffy spinoff that gave the network two shows built from the same mythology. And the WB had built something the older networks simply didn't have: a schedule that felt like it belonged to the people watching it, not to whoever happened to be home at 8 o'clock. Section 3. The Peak. By the turn of the millennium, that strategy had paid off in numbers even skeptics couldn't ignore. The network's share of the young adult audience climbed from a 3 share to a 6, and its teen share nearly doubled, going from 6 to 14. Gilmore Girls debuted in October of 2000 and became another flagship almost immediately, and Smallville followed the next year. None of this happened by accident. A network built entirely around one demographic was never trying to outrate NBC in total viewers on a Thursday night. It was trying to own an audience that advertisers were desperate to reach and simply couldn't find anywhere else on broadcast television. The lineup around this same period also grew to include Reba and Everwood, alongside earlier hits like The Steve Harvey Show. And that mix showed the network could still support programming outside its core teen drama identity when it needed to. Measured against the network's actual goal of chasing a specific audience rather than the largest possible one, the WB, for a few years there, was doing exactly what it set out to do. Section 4. Losing Buffy. The strategy had one obvious weak point, though, and it eventually caught up with the network. Its entire identity rested on shows it didn't actually own outright, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer belonged to 20th Century Fox Television. Money broke the relationship apart in 2001 when contract renewal talks between Fox and the WB collapsed. The network's final offer reportedly topped out around $1.8 million per episode, a number it maintained already represented its break-even point financially, while UPN countered with a reported $2.35 million per episode and won. A second, messier layer ran underneath that negotiation and made the whole thing feel less like a simple bidding war. News Corporation, Fox's parent company, was simultaneously acquiring stations affiliated with UPN, and reporters at the time noted that connection, with some in the press speculating it had sweetened the deal on UPN's side. Fox's own television chairman pushed back publicly against that reading, insisting the company would have made the identical deal even without owning a single UPN station, since UPN simply represented more long-term upside in his telling. Whichever version sat closer to the truth, the outcome stayed the same. The show that had defined the network for 4 straight years packed up and left for a direct competitor, mid-run, in 2001. Section 5. The Slide. Here's the part of the timeline that's easy to miss. The Buffy departure landed during a stretch that was already rougher than the show's exit alone would suggest. Back in the 1999 to 2000 season, before Buffy ever left, the WB had actually slipped to 6th place among the major broadcasters, behind UPN, and lost 19% of its household audience in a single year. Popular and Roswell had each premiered to strong numbers and then collapsed by their second seasons, and that meant the network kept needing new hits at exactly the moment its bench was thinnest. The WB also tried to widen its lane, pushing to grow beyond its narrow young female base toward a broader 12 to 34 audience, and discovered it couldn't do both jobs at once without losing focus on either one. Only 3 new shows actually stuck between 2003 and 2005. Ratings kept eroding on shows that were already established during that same stretch, and the network canceled Angel, a show that still had a steady, loyal following without anything ready to take its place. That combination is what made the mid-2000s so rough for this particular network. A lost flagship, a narrowing identity that hadn't been replaced with a new one yet, and a development slate that kept missing at the exact moment the network needed it to hit. All landed at once, and none of it was just one bad season or one lost show. Section 6. Killing the Frog. The clearest public sign that the WB knew it had a problem arrived on July 22, 2005. WB Chairman Garth Ancier announced that day that Michigan J. Frog, the top-hatted, cane-twirling mascot who'd represented the network since its 1995 launch, was being retired. In Ancier's own words, the frog was a symbol that perpetuated the young teen feel of the network, and that image no longer matched what the network wanted to project. Killing off your own mascot on purpose in a public announcement isn't something a healthy network typically does, and it read exactly like what it was: an open admission that the identity that had built the WB in the first place had stopped working, with nothing fully formed yet to take its place. If you're enjoying this one, go ahead and hit the like button, since it's the easiest way to help more people find videos like this one. And if you're new here, consider subscribing, because there's a lot more where this came from. Section 7. The merger that ended it. Time Warner's own financial filings estimated by 2005 that the WB was losing somewhere between $50 and $75 million a year, and UPN, the same rival that had poached Buffy 4 years earlier, wasn't doing any better. Warner Brothers and CBS Corporation jointly announced on January 24, 2006, that they would shut down both standalone networks and merge their strongest remaining shows into a brand new network called the CW. The WB signed off for good on September 17, 2006, 11 years and roughly 8 months after it first launched, and the CW premiered the very next night. Only 7 shows out of everything the WB had built over more than a decade actually survived the transition to the new network's first season. Seventh Heaven, Beauty and the Geek, Gilmore Girls, One Tree Hill, Reba, Smallville, and Supernatural. Buffy, Dawson's Creek, Felicity, Angel, Charmed, Roswell, and Popular were already gone by then, either canceled or finished with their runs before the merger ever happened. It's worth sitting with how quickly that happened. A network that had spent over a decade building a specific loyal audience got reduced, in the span of one January announcement, to whichever 7 shows were judged strong enough to justify carrying forward, and everything else the network had built its identity around simply didn't make the cut. Section 8. The Sign-Off. The WB's farewell broadcast ended with one last quiet touch. A white silhouette of Michigan J. Frog appeared on screen during the closing montage, the same mascot the network had publicly retired a year earlier, and he removed his top hat and bowed to the audience. It played as a goodbye for a cartoon character, but it landed as something bigger, a goodbye for an entire 11-year experiment that had figured out, better than almost anyone expected, how to build a network around a very specific audience, and never quite figured out how to keep that audience once its biggest show walked out the door. Thanks for watching. This is the Throwback Network, and I'll see you in the next one.